I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Russell.
I'm a member of the,
South Dixie Group.
South Dixie virtual meeting, and I haven't found it necessary to have a drink since January 25th.
Okay.
No, okay. 1981, and I have my little helper. So I'm in my 44th year of sobriety, and I've raised 4 children sober and 8 grandchildren, married, 44 years, something like that. Same woman, self-supporting through my own contributions usually. And it's a pleasure and privilege to be here. I just got done with a step series up in Boca. I used to get in my car with a friend, one of my sponsees, and drive an hour and a half to go out to Boca for 12 weeks. And then we'd eat dinner and a great place, Sicilian Oven if you're ever up there. And then we'd go to a meeting. We'd get back at like 11 o'clock. And it was great. I loved the group. The group was great. Wonderful group. But I'll tell you what, I'm 75 years old, and it gets a little. I'm not what I used to be. I used to do this stuff all the time. I've been doing this for 37 years, and I'm not in the same shape I used to be. So it's kind of a pleasure to be able to roll out of bed. I just live in Palmetto Bay over there, and just come on over here and see you guys. So I'm going to tell you. I know we do the step. What is the first? Most of you guys have never seen me or heard me do the steps, I don't think. Yeah, well, you got to lower your expectations. It may not be the way. It may not. I'm here to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. So it's not going to be what you think it is. But we'll see. We'll see what's going on here. Be a little different. So in any event. It's a first step. It's a little disconcerting. I always try to figure out how to do. Let me try to put it to you this way. What are you supposed to talk about? What it was like? What happened? What it's like now? And I'm a big believer in sharing testimony. The book says we never apologize. It says when you do a meeting, what your job is to tell in your own language and from your own point of view how you developed your relationship with God. So that's what my meetings are all about. The great thing about a step series is when I do a step series, because it's really sort of hard to explain everything about your life in 12 weeks, but we get a pretty good idea of where I'm coming from, what's going on, and as they say, you can take what you like and leave the rest. But so I like doing step meetings because I get to know you get to know me. Sometimes people ask me questions, and we go from there. So it's nice, but the problem is, and I like to give testimony, and that's what it says. We never apologize for God. It says it twice. It says we never apologize for God, so I don't. I do a lot of God meetings. It says all men of faith have courage. Anybody ever read that in the book? You know what that means? It means if you don't have faith, you're a coward. It means you'll never get to the point where you lose fear of people and economic insecurity. It means you'll always worry about money. You'll always worry about your security, and you'll always be bound to worry about what other people think about you. You'll do what most alcoholics do because we're delusional. That's what it says: selfishness, self-centeredness, suffering from 100 fears. 100 fears. We're delusional. Our alcoholic thinking seems the only normal one. It's not even the drinking. The drinking is not really the problem. It really isn't once you get here. The drinking isn't a problem. If you get here, and everybody gets sober here. Nobody doesn't get sober. They won't be able to stop drinking. They'll come here, they'll get sober, and then they'll drink after a month. But if they drink after a month, it's not because of the drink. It's because of alcoholism. Because my book says drinking is a symptom of the problem. The real problem centers in your mind, not your body. And it's going to take the first 20 years of your sobriety with a lot of pain and trials and total horseshit for you to realize how fucked up you are. You don't have a clue, but you're going to find out. But it ain't going to be all at once, thank God, because you'd be sucking on the muzzle of a gun. You're going to find out at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're going to find out when the husband or the wife leaves, or when you're lonely. It says in the book, here and there once in a while an alcoholic who used to be a drinker, says feel better, look better, having a better time. We laugh at such Sally. We find he'll soon try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. Soon to know loneliness as few do. Well, we tell ourselves a lot of things. Alcoholics tell themselves a lot of things. We like to tell ourselves things like, I don't give a shit what other people think about me. Sometimes we say it out loud. I used to say it out loud. I don't give a crap what they think about me. They don't know who they're dealing with, But what you ultimately realize is people that actually think that or tell themselves that they don't care what other people think about them. All they do is worry their entire life what other people think about them, because people that really don't care what other people think about them, they never tell themselves they don't care what other people think about them. They say things like pass the ketchup, but they don't say that stuff. And at some point in time you escape the bucket of crabs. A is like a giant bucket of crabs. I'll explain that later on. I'm not going to do it tonight. We'll get into that. But so here's the problem. The problem is what it says. It says, never apologize for God. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through our testimony, through what we are and who we are, our testimony, what he has done for us. It says that once we begin to outgrow fear. How would you like to live a fearless life? I know you can live a sober life one flipping day at a time. I know you go to meetings because you don't want to drink, because you're scared of drinking. How would you like to live a fearless life? Do you think it's possible to live a fearless life? I like to talk to people that have time, because I know whether I'm speaking in Bali, Indonesia, or Vancouver, Washington, wherever I'm speaking, I know there's somebody in the audience who has 11 years, who in 6 months will be drunk. I know the newcomer is the most important person in the group, but you want to know a guy with 20 years who's about to drink or is miserable or going to commit suicide, he's pretty important too. And, when you've been around for almost 44 years, most of the people, you see what you guys don't get, the experience. My sponsor used to say, when a man with experience meets a man with money, the man with experience will walk away with the money, and the man with the money will have walked away with an experience. Here's an experience you guys don't have. Most of you. I don't know all of you. I know some of you. Most of you don't have the experience of having a guy with 35 years come up to you and asking for help because he wants to kill himself. Most of you don't have experience sponsoring people with 25, 30, 35 years. You have experience, with people with 5 months, 2 years, 5 years, stuff like that. You don't have experience with a guy. You guys believe, this is what you believe, that the reason people drink is because they stop going to meetings. And I can tell you there's plenty of people, there's probably more people that drink that are going to meetings. There are tons of people that are sponsoring people, are frantically working this program just to stay sober, just one day at a time, just to stay sober, one day at a time, and they end up drinking. Because they're doing the program mechanically. They're doing everything mechanically, which works for 5 years or 10 years, maybe 15 years. But after a while, being on like a hamster on the wheel, being in jail, just one more day, all of a sudden you just start saying things like, I'm hanging in there. You're not being rocketed into the fourth dimension. There's another fellowship here. The Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, the only requirement is the desire to stay sober. It doesn't even have to be an honest desire. You could say, well, I got nothing to do tonight. Got a fleeting thought, maybe I'll go. That's the only requirement. But the requirement to be on the road to happy destiny is, it says this. He says, well, we may not know you. Talk about the fellowship of this. What if we don't know you? He says, we cannot be sure. God will determine that, and your real reliance has to be on him. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave, and it will be a godly fellowship if you're blessed and you're lucky. And then it says this. It says, see to it that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. And most will never develop a relationship with him because they don't even know who he is. And, I get guys coming to me and says, I believe in God. The big book says you can have an earnest belief in God and your faith is barren. Barren, because you really don't know. So some guy came up and says, well, I believe in God. When I'm approached by somebody with 30 years or 20 years and they have a problem, invariably it's not because they don't know how to do a 4-step. It's not because they're not sponsoring people. It's because there's something missing. The secret ingredient is missing. So I asked him, I said, well, you believe in God? I said, yeah. I said, well, do you believe God? And they say, what do you mean? I said, well, you say you believe in God. He says, yes. So do you believe God? And he doesn't know what I'm talking about because he doesn't know who God is. So if you don't know who God is, how can you do the sixth step? You know, the whole point, that's the step that separates them. Not the third step doesn't separate them. Everybody does the third step. You get on your knees, you say the third step prayer, you're done, you get up, and then you look at your bank account. You get on your knees, you say the third step prayer, you give your life to, you're serious as a heart attack, then you get up and you look to get laid. You get on your knees, you say the third step prayer, you give your life to God, and then you think about your life and your clothes and your wife and your car, and then you spend the next 20 years sucking your thumb like a thumb-sucking crybaby and complaining in meetings about your life. But you don't have a relationship with God. You have a relationship, you know, it says in the book, it says God is everything or he's nothing. Half measures avail us nothing. And your relationship with God is like this. God is in everything. Money is everything. The woman is everything. The man is everything. Your weight is everything. The scale is everything. The car is everything. Your job is everything. What other people think about you is everything. Not being rejected is everything. You know, having people pay attention to you is everything. God is so low on the flipping list, you can't even imagine. But you're not drinking, and they tell you, hey, that's all what this thing is about. That's what they're handing out medallions. You could rate 15 nuns and a penguin. It doesn't matter if you haven't had a drink in 15 years. They're giving you one of those medal things, you know, and telling you you're doing great. Except one day, your day comes where you'll have absolutely no defense against the first drink, and your only defense will come from God, and then you'll find out that you really have no idea who God is. And that's the deal. And I speak from experience in my own life. I don't go to meetings anymore. I stopped going to meetings to stop drinking or not drink. And you won't understand that because it goes against every philosophy you've heard in AA. You know, don't drink, go to meetings. You know, don't drink even if your ass falls off. People that don't go to meetings, let me tell you something. I go to meetings to not drink. I don't sponsor people to not drink. I don't do all the mechanical stuff to not drink. Now, I got to tell you something. For 10, 15 years, I did everything in AA so I wouldn't drink. Everything in AA. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there reaches a point in time, you know, Bill Wilson, when he coined that phrase, God as you understand him, you know what most people don't understand this. They just pick a phrase they like and they stick with it for the rest of their lives. And he said, I couldn't believe in a personal God, so when they said, God as you understand, he said, I could use that as my beginning. 21 years later, it wasn't good enough for him. He reached the blank wall, and that's when he started using LSD. I'm not telling you something nobody knows about. Everybody knew about that, except most of the people in AA now. And that's when he wrote the essay, The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety. He talked about how he got it all wrong, he got off track. When Bill Wilson, you see, there was Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, and I'm into Dr. Bob's sobriety. Bill Wilson was my hero. I put him up on a pedestal. He's not the God of my understanding anymore. And Bill Wilson, you know, I don't know how many people have actually read the book. I'm sure most of you have. I hope you have. You know, he had this white light experience, you know. Bam, in the hospital. Couldn't stop drinking. Bam. The spiritual wind blew through. The light went on, and the sun shone in his hospital room. He said, so this is the God of the prophets. He was blown away. And Alcoholics Anonymous number 3 says, the Lord has done so much for me, curing me of this terrible disease that I got to keep talking about it and telling other people. And Bill Dotson, who was the man on the bed, you know, in that little picture they have in some rooms, the man on the bed said, I finally understood. I knew there was something wrong, something missing, something that I ought to have. And Bill Dotson said, after he heard Bill Wilson say that, he said, I knew what was missing. Bill gave all credit to God. All credit to God. And all he wanted to do was tell other people about God. And then a few months later, Bill went up to Henrietta Seiberling. Bill, who was the wannabe lawyer from New York City, Manhattan, went up to Henrietta Seiberling and said, I think we talked too much. I wanted God, I needed God, and he came. But then he says this, but soon his presence was blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly within myself. And that's when all of a sudden God for Bill moved away from the center of his life to something he felt he had to apologize for because he was more worried about what other people thought about him. And Henrietta Seiberling, if you read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, said to Bill when he said, I think we talk too much about God, Henrietta Seiberling said, Bill, the only reason you're sober is because of God. And if you don't talk about God, you might as well be a member, you might as well be the Rotary Club. Stop worrying about pleasing alcoholics. Maybe you ought to be concerned about pleasing God. She said, finally, Bill agreed. And I find in my own life, and I plead guilty to this, I got down on my knees on December 25th, Christmas morning at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was 31 years old. I thought my life was over. I had lost everything, including my self-esteem. I'm a self-pity-aholic, but I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. I had a different, there's a line in the Bible that says, worldly sorrow brings death, but godly sorrow brings repentance and salvation. I know what worldly sorrow is because I have a PhD in feeling sorry for myself. I have a PhD in sitting by the phonograph, listening to the same Alki record over and over again, like a Private Looks at 40 or Rainy Days and Mondays or I'm Mr. Blue or, anything like that, and just feeling sorry for myself and thinking about my funeral and all those women that were there around my coffin feeling sorry and sad and guilty because of the way they fucked me over and everything like that. And I was still alive. I was hiding behind the tree. If you're an alcoholic and you drink and you feel self-pity, you got to have a vivid imagination to make it really good. And that was my life, feeling sorry for myself. I could walk through a hospital with a bunch of kids that were dying of cancer, and somehow on the other end I'd walk out and I'd feel sorry for myself. That's worldly sorrow. But at 8 a.m. in the morning, I got down on my knees and I felt something called godly sorrow. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I became ashamed of the person I had become. And I got on my knees and I asked the Lord to come into my life. And that's just a fact. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to do it. I don't care what you do, really. Quite frankly, my sobriety doesn't depend on you. And that's what happened, and that's what I did, which is not a big deal for most people, but for a Jewish kid from Great Neck, New York, it was a big deal. I can tell you that, but it's kind of hard to understand unless you've been there. It's like my sponsor used to say. He said, Russ, never rob an alcoholic of his desperation. Every alcoholic has to have his last drink. And so here's the deal with me. So for 20 years, I did everything in this thing because I didn't want to drink. And then for the next 23 years, I had another motive. And you may find that one day, if you survive and you get, what is that, rocket in the fourth dimension of existence? It's in the book. It says we became a rocket in the fourth dimension of existence. Well, that's the other fellowship. That's the fellowship of the Spirit with a capital S. It's a different fellowship. You don't get into that fellowship because you just want to stop drinking. It's a different fellowship. And there's this fellowship of the Spirit, which what happens is when you get involved in it, you experience joy in your life, which is better than happiness. And what happens is you get rocketed in the fourth dimension of existence, what you haven't even dreamed. You know heaven and you know peace. And there's only one thing: you have to do what's called the great fact. And the great fact is this, and guess what? Nothing less than this. As a matter of fact, in the book it says that several times. It says half measures avail us nothing. It says if we don't get rid of our old ideas, the result was nil, nothing, ultimately nothing. You may stay sober for a few years, and ultimately it's nothing. And the great fact is this, that God's got to become the central fact of your life, the number one thing. Not your wife, not your kids, not your job, not money. Now listen, you can write New York and say there's some guy here with 44 years saying, whatever the hell I'm saying. But they're just going to tell you I'm quoting from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So the first thing is God becomes the central fact of your life. And the second thing is that you become convinced, without doubt, that he lives in your heart and mind in a way which is deep miraculous, helping you do things that you could never do by yourself. And that's not Russell Spatz talking, that's the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, most people in AA will tell you not to talk too much about God because you're killing newcomers, but what's killing newcomers is because they don't hear about this stuff. Because alcoholics don't talk about it, because there's an undercurrent in Alcoholics Anonymous, and there has been for years, that's anti-God and anti-religion. I know the big book says we lose all prejudice, even against organized religion. We begin to see where they're right. I know the big book says burn the idea of God in every alcoholic's mind. I know the big book says that, but the fellowship is full of alcoholics. And if you understand anything about the true disease of Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you read between the lines, you don't even have to read between the lines, it's right up there. It says in chapter of the agnostics, it says a mere code of morals are a better philosophy of your life. You know what a code of morals are. Do the next right thing, good orderly direction, get it, good orderly direction, G-O-D. The alcoholics will do anything to not believe in God, say they're doing good orderly direction. They say if a mere code of morals or better philosophy of life would have helped us, we would have been sober a long time ago, but such morals don't help us. We had to find a power by which we could live. Now, you can find a power by which you could stop drinking for a few years, but can you find a power by which you could live? Live without fear of what other people think about you. Live without fear of being rejected. It says that means, of course, we wrote a book where we're going to talk about God. And then they say, here is the problem with alcoholics. The hackles in the neck stand up. They don't want to hear that crap. So you have to understand, you got the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, this wonderful fellowship, which I love, which is not composed of, this is not Well People's Anonymous. This is not, this is a whole bunch of people, 90% of which don't want to do this shit. They want to do it custom made, the way I want to do it, don't tell me what to do. And a few people want what Dr. Bob had. And that's why Dr. Bob, when he 12-stepped Clarence the brewmaster in 1937, by the way, between 1935 and 1939, you couldn't go to a meeting unless you got down on your knees in front of everybody in the group and gave your life to the Lord. That's just a fact. So you may think a lot of people didn't do that, and so they died, and you'd be right, because you couldn't go to a meeting unless you do. Everybody in AA knew exactly what it was about. Nobody was standing up in the back of the room saying, well, if they had done that to me, I wouldn't be here, because they wouldn't have been there. Everybody knew what this thing was all about and who was in charge of this deal. And if you ask Dr. Bob, what's first things first mean? Is it on the wall here? Do you have first things first? Is it anywhere on the wall here? You don't have first things? Oh, it's probably over there. Do you guys know what that means? You know what that means? Anybody know what that means? Dr. Bob coined that. It means seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. That's what it means. I mean, you could play games with this thing and make believe it's not what you think it is, and that kind of stuff. So my problem is this. Here's my problem. I want to somehow, over a period of 12 weeks, tell you, where I'm at, what happened, how it happened, and all that sort of stuff. But you have to do it through testimony, and that's the way I like to do it. I think people deserve to put yourself in the deal. You understand? Just talk about, not tell them this is it, but just talk about what's in the book and what happened to you, But here's my problem. Let me tell you what my problem is. I'm 75 years old. For the first 31 years of my life, I drank like a fish, and I hurt a lot of people. I ripped their hearts out. And then something happened to me. So if you talk about what it's like, so for me to talk about what it's like, what happened, what it's like now, when I had 2 or 3 years, and I went to talk what it was like, what happened, what it's like now, I give you a drunk-a-log for 30 minutes. And it was good, and it was funny, because I'm an attorney, I'm a paid bullshit artist, so I'm a talker, and I can do that shit, you know what I mean? And you'd be laughing and say, yeah, that's funny. He drank, and then he drank, and then he drank. I talk about how I hurt my wife, and how I hurt my son, and how I ruined my life, and how I didn't give a shit about anybody except myself, and I talk about that deal. I asked my sponsor once, what does it mean? Selfish, self-centered, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, step on the toes of others. They retaliate seemingly without any reason whatsoever. So an alcoholic is self-will-run riot, and it doesn't even sound that bad. And I said to my sponsor, I said, so what does that mean? He says, you don't give a shit about anybody except yourself. I said, ooh, I like the way they say it in the big book better, So you need to find yourself a sponsor that'll sometimes confront you, because alcoholics need to be confronted, not patted on the back. Sometimes we need a pat on the back. Sometimes we just need, if people don't confront us, we just blow them away. For 8 years I was on relay in Miami. If you called up Alcoholics Anonymous for 8 years in Miami on a Friday night, anytime Friday or Friday night, Saturday morning, you got to speak to me. So that's why nobody got sober during that 8-year period. But I got some great stories about that. So here's the deal. So I'm 3 years or 4 years or 5 or 6 years sober. And I'm telling you what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. So I spent 30 minutes talking about my drinking for the first 31 years and the stories. Because you don't come in here knowing the story. You can't, alcoholics don't have any story. My story was, it's not my fault, you don't understand, it got bad breaks and mistakes. I don't know a story, but I start hearing it, and you can't tell an alcoholic anything, because they're all full of defense. Oh, no, you don't understand, that's not me, that's you, I'm different, or anything like that. What happens is you got to flank them. They're sitting in a room, they see some guy tell a story, they're listening to him, they're paying attention, because we like stories, and all of a sudden the alcoholic says, that guy's fucking crazy. And then the next thought you have is, shit, I was doing that last Wednesday, and that's all of a sudden you start identifying with the stories. Then you start thinking about your stories. Now as you're sober, you go through all sorts of crap for a year, 2, a month, whatever, and every day you have another story. Now you're sitting in an A room, you got 3 months, and you would say, you wouldn't believe what happened today. My mother said this, and this happened, and that happened, everything like that, and usually I would blow up, and something terrible would happen, but I said the perfect thing, and I didn't get mad, and my mother said thank you, and everything was wonderful, and then they say something like this, and that's not me. And it's not them. It's not them. It's part of inspirational thinking, which we come to rely upon. It becomes a working part of the mind. And that's how you learn about this disease and your stories and the people, by being upset and getting over it and all that sort of stuff. But here's the problem. So I would tell this drunk-a-log for 30 minutes, right? And it was filled with all sorts of drunk stories. Then I tell what happened. And what happened was this. I got to a point in my life where I thought my life was over. It was never going to get better again. I got on my knees, gave my life to the Lord. This is what happened. I didn't do the steps. I didn't do anything. I just got down on my knees like Bill Wilson, I think, gave my life, And I continued to drink for 30 days, but that doesn't mean nothing happened, because God has a way of moving the furniture around in your life and your mind, even as you're fucking up. As a matter of fact, you will find, and I find, that even at 44 years, I still have the ability to fuck up. I'm still not perfect, not even close to it, you know what I mean? But God has a way of using us anyway and getting us better anyway. It's not about being perfect. It's about looking at him and really trying to do the best you can. And as they say in the 6th step, that separates the man from the boy, trying to grow in the image of likeness of your creator. And if you don't know who your creator is, it's hard to grow in the image and likeness of something you don't know about. Mm-hmm. And so the bottom line is, that's what happened. And then what do I talk about? I talk about the stories that happened for the last 3 years. So I'm 3 years sober. I got 3 years of stories. I got 20 stories that happened that are good stories, and about alcoholism and about me and being victorious over alcohol. That is true stories about myself and testimony that may help somebody. Good stories. Mm-hmm. Now I got 5 years of stories. Now I got 10 years of stories. Now I got 15 years of stories. And I got so many stories, and I'm speaking all over the United States. And I can't remember half the stories, and you can only tell about 5 of them, at one time, and then the whole hour is gone. So I actually make a list of the stories, because that way you don't have to think much, especially good for me now because I've got dementia. Well, I know I have dementia because I told my wife, I said, finally I have emotional sobriety. She says, no, that's dementia. Apparently, dementia, not paying attention to anything, not hearing anything, not really know what's going on, not having anything, having a blank mind, totally blank, and just sitting around staring at people, and things, and taking it all in without being nervous. Apparently, dementia is very similar to emotional sobriety. So if you just stay sober until you have dementia, people are going to think, you're sober. If you get, let me tell you something. You can do a real fake job,
My mother has emotional sobriety.
What happens is so I make a list of the stories. Okay, and I got 190 stories. So I just pick this one, and I do the stories. And now there's 20 years sobriety, and there's no more list. It's 30 years sobriety, no more list. 40 years sobriety, no more list. I don't even know how many. What does it matter? Because I can't remember them. So let me ask you something. I've been doing this for 44 years. How am I going to tell you all the stories? How am I going to tell you? It says the way we get a new perspective is by repeated humiliations and the final crushing of our self-sufficiency. Have you ever been humiliated in your life? Have you ever worried? Have you ever woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning with humiliation and loneliness and worry about something that's going to happen? Have you ever had a week where you're sober and you're going to meetings, but you have one particular thing you're worried about, you don't know what's going to happen, and you're scared, and you don't even know whether there's anybody you can talk to about that because you're sort of scared too, because your pride is going on or something, and somehow it goes away, and you say, thank God, because of God, or you pray, or whatever it is you do, and you say, okay, that was great, and then all of a sudden, the next day you're back to the same old bullshit, and you go into meetings, and you're staying home, and you say, when is this going to go away? And you read the promises at every meeting, and it happens to you maybe once in a while. You get a little promise here, a little promise there, and stuff like that. But it's not permanent. It's like hit and miss. It's like once in a while. It comes and it goes. Tuesday, you're into the promises. Wednesday, you want to kill yourself. And so you say to yourself, you got 10 years, and you say, when the fuck is it going to work for me? When am I going to not worry about what other people think about me? When am I going to not worry about the money? I said to Ray O'Keefe one time, I said I was worried about money. I said, listen, I've been doing this thing for 10 years now. 10 years is not a short time for an alcoholic. I mean, I'm like one of these guys. I'm going to lose 100. The reason I can never go on a diet is because I can't lose 100 pounds in 1 week. And 1 week is the best I can do on a diet. You know what I mean? I mean, it's got to come off like, unbelievable. I want things fast. I want them now. That's the deal. I don't want to go to 3,000 meetings in order to get, the same effect I can get from a shot of scotch. I want it now. So I said to Ray O'Keefe, I can't believe this. I've been doing this thing. I sponsor everything that moves. I'm the Intergroup Banquet Chairman for 2 years in a row. There's nothing I'm not doing. I'm the secretary of the group. I'm doing this, that, and the other thing. He says, when am I going to have economic security? Have you read that part where you have economic security? I said, when is that going to happen for me? When am I going to be a millionaire? He says, who told you that was going to happen for you? I said, it's one of the promises. He says, it's not. I said, no, it's in the book. It's one of the promises. I said, it's no. I said, they just read it at the meeting. And he says, read it to me. And I read it, and he says, fear of economic insecurity will leave us. He says, yeah, the fear will leave you. He said, but Russell, you will always be broke. It just won't bother you. And I said, thanks, that helps a lot. Man, I'll tell you, it really lifted me up, you know what I mean? It's the fear that goes away. One time I was complaining about a guy who bounced a check on me, like a $50 check on me, and I don't know, it was a $500 check on me. I was really pissed off and everything. I was telling everybody that moved for a week, it was on my mind and everything like that, because I bounced checks and everything like that. And my sponsor came up to me, it was Bob Sullivan at the time. He said, you're talking about this guy all the time, bouncing his check on you. He says, what the hell are you doing? You're just boring people. You're talking about it. I mean, get over it. He says, when you get over it, what do you say if you're an alcoholic? If it happened to you, you would, if it happened to you, you'd feel that, I want to justify feeling crappy. And he said, let me ask you something, Russell. How would you feel if it didn't bother you? And I said, I don't understand the question. I didn't understand the question. He said, the question's simple. How would you feel if it didn't bother you? I said, I swear to God, Bob, I don't understand the question. He says, the question's simple. How would you feel if it didn't bother you? I said, I swear to God, I don't understand. How would I feel if it didn't bother me that he bounced a $500 check on me? He says, yeah, how would you feel if it didn't bother you? How would I feel? I said, wait a second. How would I feel if it didn't bother me that he bounced a $500 check on you? Yes, exactly. How would you feel if it didn't bother you that he bounced a $500 check on you? And I said, well, if it didn't bother me, I'd feel fine. He said, there you go, and he walked away. Who the fuck are these guys? What are they, stupid? Are they stupid? So here's the problem. So how can you tell? So I can tell you what it's like now, and I can tell you what it was like before, and I can tell you what happened. But how can I tell you everything that happened between one day sober and 43 years and 9 months sober? How many stories would I have to tell you about that? You know? How do I tell you about going from inspirational thinking once in a while to a state of mind that becomes a major part of your mind where you come to rely upon it? How do I tell you about a faith that I'd say this writing prayer all the time to some God I didn't understand or didn't even know was there, to a faith where God becomes the central fact of my life and my whole life revolves around God? How do I tell you about not having a bucket list? How do I tell you about going from a man who wakes up every morning and says, if I only had another wife, if I only had a girlfriend, if I only had a romance, if I only wasn't alone, if I only had a new job, if I only had new money, you know, if I only had a new suit, if I only had a new car, a man who every day of the week woke up saying, knowing that if he only had this, he'd be okay. Not knowing that what he's really telling himself is that he's not okay. And then going after that thing and getting that thing and worrying about that thing. And then waking up the next morning and saying, man, if I only had that thing or this thing. That woman, if I could only marry her, I'd be okay. If I could just marry her, I'd be okay. And then I marry her. And I'm okay for what, a week, a month? For me, it was, you have a baby. And now all of a sudden it's 9 months, it's a year down the road, and I'm not okay. You know, because, you know, like you get a car. If I only had that car, I'd be okay. And then you get that car, and a year later, it's a used car. And you get that wife, and then it's a used wife. I know the girls don't like to hear it, but it's true. And then you're sitting in the bar, and I never cheat on my wife. You know why? Because I'm an honorable guy. So I get it at 4:30 in the afternoon, and I start drinking, and I sit in the corner with my friends, and I stay till 4:30 in the morning while my wife and baby are at home. And I roll in every night at 4:30 in the morning. And I never cheat on my wife. I just sit in the bar and bullshit around and look at the blondes, brunettes, and redhead and say, if I only wasn't married, I could have that one. If I only wasn't married, I could have this one. My wife is at home with a baby trying to wonder where I am, you know, because she didn't, whatever it was she was supposed to do for me, she didn't do it for me. Because I'm an alcoholic and nothing can make me feel okay. Because I'm a worthless piece of shit and I know it, but nobody else can know it and I don't even know it. Every once in a while I'm showering in the shower and all of a sudden I hear a voice and the voice says, you're an asshole, you ought to kill yourself. You're such a piece of shit. You're never going to be okay. I look around and see who's telling me that crap and there's nobody in the shower but me. And I ultimately realized that is where the real alcoholism lives. That's the real deal that you deal with. That's the deal that you deal with a 10-year sobriety, 11-year sobriety when you know you're a fucking phony. You know you're an asshole and nobody else. And all you do is worry about being rejected and everybody's got to accept you and everybody's got to like you. And that's the real dis-ease. How are you going to make that go away, big shot? How are you going to do that? How are you going to be rocking in the fourth dimension when you know deep down inside you're a nothing? You're always going to be a nothing. You're never anything but a nothing. You used to put something in your mouth that turns you into an almost. When you're nothing, almost is top of the world. So how are you gonna get rid of that alcoholism that centers in your mind, not your body, when you don't even know you have it? You don't even know you have it. You know, I talk about this crap, you know, nobody ever talks about it. I talk about this crap, people come up to me after the meeting, they say, you're talking about me, you're talking about, no, I was talking about me. You just never heard that stuff. You don't even think that's alcohol. You didn't even, because you have no idea what alcoholism is. You don't have a clue. You don't know how to get rid of it. That's because all you think is alcoholism has something to do with drinking. It has something to do with drinking, but it also has something to do with feeling crappy about yourself and not being a man and not being a woman and not being an adult and not growing up. So, I'm not going to be able to tell. Well, I'm just going to tell you two things. We got 5 minutes. I can do it in 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you about what it's like for me now, because that I can do in like 2 minutes. What it's like now. But I'll tell you one story, one drunk story. You know, well, it's not really a drunk story. It's an alcoholism story. Before I came in, and the reason I'm going to tell you this story, it's kind of funny. I happen to believe that Lord puts things in your mind. You know, stuff happens and they're meant to be shared. So I had a guy come up to me and say to me, he says, some guy who I guess heard me 20, 30 years ago when I was doing this stuff, and he says, I heard you 25 years ago, and you told this story, and it changed my life. It was the greatest story I ever heard. And I have people that'll say to me, tell that story, tell that, I said, really? He says, yeah. He said, what story was that? I'm curious. So he tells me this story that he heard 30 years ago, and I have no idea what he's talking about. He says, you told this story. You told the story, and I said, well, tell me, he tells the story, and then I sort of remembered it. I said, I remember that story. I used to tell it all the time. He says, that was a good story. I wonder why I stopped talking about it. Probably the dementia, or, other stories fill in and other stories come up. You know what I mean? And I remembered the story. And I said, wow, that's really something. And it was a story that happened to me when I was going at it and drinking and everything. I had this girl, this woman that I loved, Alky Love. Do you guys know anything about Alky Love? You got to be with her. I don't know anything about the girls. I have a suspicion they're the same way, but worse. But I don't know. I'm not a girl. I've never been a girl. So there's Alky Love. So Alky Love is like this. You're always thinking about her. You think about, does she really love you? Who's she with? What's she thinking about? Is she cheating on you? And you think about it. Your whole life, you're obsessed. Alcoholics love obsessions, obsessed with her. And I had this gal, and I loved her. Her name was Lynn. She was from Totowa, New Jersey. And we were together for a whole year at the University of Miami. And that means, when you're 18, 19 years old, that means sex every day, and it's all sorts of crazy stuff like that. And one day she says to me, Russell, my parents haven't seen me in a year. They're the ones who are paying for the education. They would like me to be home for Christmas. So I say to her, the woman I love, you guys have been in love before, right? I say, now you won't identify with this, but I say, well, what about me? I know you're laughing, you don't know what it's like, but let me tell you something. What about me? And we start yelling at each other, and I'm screaming and yelling, what about me? What about me? What about me? And she goes to see her parents. And I'm in my house, like drinking one day, and I get a brainstorm, because alcoholics have brainstorms. And there was a credit card I had that had not been maxed out. I said, I am going to buy a ticket and surprise her on Christmas morning. And this is a brilliant idea, because I love her. And so I buy the ticket, and Christmas morning at like 7 o'clock in the morning, I show up at her house, and this guy's smiling. He's done this every day of the week, you know what I mean? And I show up at her house, and I say, I'm here to ruin your Christmas. Well, I called it love. The cops called it stalking. But in any event, it's not really important. It's not really important. So you learn things about yourself. Is it really love, or is it stalking? You know what I mean? Is it really love, or is it stalking? The motives. So this is what it's like for me now. I'm going to read it from the big book, because I read this thing. Here's the deal. I read this thing 35 years ago. And I said, and I couldn't put it down. I kept on reading, and tonight when I was thinking, well, why don't you tell them what it's like now, and then you can fill in the gaps. And I took this book, and I opened up the book like that, and it was on the exact same page as the story. Now, that's what we call confirmation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you want to tell a story, and you look in the book, and you open it up, you turn right to the story, that's confirmation. So this isn't a story. A story he sold himself short. This latest part of my life, it's 3 paragraphs. This latest part of my life has had a purpose. Not in great things accomplished, but in daily living. I was told once, if you hit the age of 30 years old and you don't have a true purpose in your life, you're going to be, to a certain extent, neurotic. And I was one neurotic son of a bitch, I can tell you that. This latest part of my life has had a purpose, not in the great things accomplished, but in daily living. Courage to face each day has replaced the fears and uncertainties of earlier years. Acceptance of things as they are has replaced the old impatient chomping at the bit to conquer the world. I have stopped tilting at windmills and instead have tried to accomplish the little daily tasks, unimportant themselves, but tasks that are an integral part of living fully. Where derision, contempt, and pity were once shown me, I now enjoy the respect of many people. Where once I had casual acquaintances, all of whom were fair weather friends, I now have a host of friends who accept me for what I am. And over my AA years, I have made many, many real, honest, sincere friendships that I will always cherish. I'm rated as a modestly successful man. My stock of material goods is not great, but I have a fortune in friendships, courage, self-assurance, and an honest appraisal of my own abilities. Above all, I have gained the greatest thing, according to any man, the love and understanding of a gracious God who has lifted me from the alcoholic scrap heap to a position of trust where I have been able to reap the rich rewards that come from showing a little love for others and from helping them as I can. Thank you.